The conference room felt smaller than usual that morning. The air thick with the scent of stale coffee and cheap gas station donuts nobody really wanted. I sat at the far end of the long table, badge clipped to my shirt like it still meant something after 8 years at Nexus Dynamics. Marcus Lang, our CEO, cleared his throat at the head of the table. His tie sat crooked, and his eyes held that forced sparkle executives get when they're about to deliver bad news dressed up as opportunity. Team, let's kick things off with some exciting leadership refresh updates, he began. Voice too bright for the room. Investors watched through Zoom cameras blinking on the big screens. Department heads shifted in their seats, already knowing their lines in this scripted betrayal. I'd been the systems architect here since before the big fintech merger in 2018. I was the one who kept the trading platform alive when markets tanked in 2020, stitching together legacy code from 3 different companies with custom scripts no one else touched. Those late nights debugging routing loops that could have wiped out millions in transactions. I remembered everyone. But today, I was just a line item. Marcus kept talking about streamlining operations, modernizing the stack. Then came the words that landed like a quiet slap. As part of this refresh, we're parting ways with some longtime contributors, including our systems architect, Jordan Hayes. A few polite claps from the CFO, Elena Vargas, who once asked me if my monitoring tools were just fancy Excel macros. A marketing director whispered finally under her breath. The camera panned to me. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I stood slowly, unclipped my badge with deliberate fingers, and walked to the front. The room went still. Tell the investors why the entire trading network will stop processing in 9 minutes, I said evenly. Silence dropped like a stone. Marcus's smile froze. Elena's latte cup hovered halfway to her lips. I placed the badge on the table, turned, and walked out. No slamming doors. No final speech. Just the soft click of my shoes on the polished floor. Outside the building in downtown Chicago, the October wind cut sharp through my jacket. I lit a cigarette with steady hands, the same hands that had typed thousands of lines keeping Nexus from collapsing under its own weight. I wasn't raging. I was done. 8 years of being the invisible backbone, patching undocumented flaws in systems everyone assumed were bulletproof. They never asked how it all stayed up. They just celebrated the uptime metrics I delivered quietly. I walked toward the corner diner I knew well, a greasy spoon place called Lou's with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like regret. Halfway there, I pulled a scratched USB drive from my pocket, the one holding recovery tools I'd built to bypass official sandboxes full of holes. I dropped it in a trash bin without looking back. Symbolic. Maybe. Or just exhaustion. Behind me, 6 floors up, the server racks hummed innocently. Then the first chirp, a routing threshold warning. Logs started filling with red flags no one monitored anymore, because I always had. The custom heartbeat scripts I'd written in pain. 2 a.m. Patches during outages while my wife slept upstairs began timing out. No sabotage. Just the absence of the one person who knew every load-bearing wall in the blueprint. By the time I pushed open Lou's door, the first transaction delays were hitting. I slid into my usual booth. The waitress, Carla, nodded without asking. Black coffee. 2 creams. The TV above the counter murmured local news. My phone stayed silent for now, face down on the table. I took a slow sip and felt the first real breath in years leave my chest. The structure was starting to feel its own weight. The coffee burned going down, bitter and familiar. Carla set down a slice of apple pie without comment. She had that look, knowing something heavy had happened but respecting the quiet. Outside Lou's window, Chicago traffic crawled under gray skies. Inside the Nexus building, panic was just beginning to uncoil. The CTO, Derek Klein leaned over a junior engineer's shoulder in the ops war room. Reroute through the secondary region failover, he ordered, voice cracking slightly. The junior frowned. It's not engaging. No response from the East Cluster. Derek's Patagonia vest darkened with sweat. The investor's Zoom chat exploded. What's happening with transaction processing? Screens flickered as SLA monitors flipped from green to angry red. One by one. No documented failover existed because I'd never written it down. Documenting every custom loop and heartbeat patch would have invited consultants to replace me with off-the-shelf Kubernetes clusters and shiny dashboards. They wanted plausible deniability, not transparency. Now they had both, empty hands and failing systems. I pictured it clearly. Marcus staring at his assistant screen, grin twitching into confusion. Internal ticketing froze completely. New tasks couldn't submit. The digital spine locked rigid. Payroll batches reversed themselves mid-run. Contractor payments bounced. Finance voices rose in the background. Half our Q4 disbursements just vanished. My phone started buzzing around minute 4. Unknown numbers. Slack notifications from deactivated accounts. Voicemails piling up. I let it vibrate against the table. This wasn't revenge. It was truth asserting itself once the denial lifted. They thought firing me was a clean cut. But institutional memory doesn't work that way. I hadn't rigged anything. I'd simply built reflexes into aging hardware, real-time adaptations layered over mergers no one fully understood anymore. Pull the architect out. And the reflexes forget how to respond. Flashback hit me as I stared into my coffee. 2021. The night of vendor migration nearly took down live trading for 3 states. I stayed until 4 a.m., rewriting routing logic on the fly while executives slept. No thank you the next day, just a pat on the back and a reminder to document better next time. But documenting meant exposing how fragile it all was. So I kept the critical pieces in my head, in scripts running silently on forgotten nodes. Survival, not spite. At minute 7, the core transaction framework choked. Order IDs stranded in memory. API gateways returned nothing but echoes. Client dashboards across the Midwest froze with spinning wheels. Support lines lit up like a storm. 1,000 calls per minute slammed into a wheezing system. Slack channels filled with frantic prayers and blame. Derek tried a full routing reset. Reboot the legacy loop stack, he commanded. The system tried, then looped endlessly against an old test IP I'd repurposed years ago as a diagnostic ghost. No one had shut it down because no one knew it existed. It's circling, the junior whispered in horror. Timeout after timeout. I pushed the pie plate aside. Carla refilled my cup. Rough morning, she asked softly. I nodded once. Let's call it gravity. The TV caption scrolled. Major Chicago fintech firm Nexus Dynamics facing widespread outage. Potential millions in losses. B-roll showed security holding back reporters. Lights flickering behind glass like the building itself was gasping. My phone buzzed again. This time I glanced. Derek's personal cell. Then Marcus. Legal team addresses. I turned it over. They weren't calling Jordan the person. They were calling the map they'd just thrown away. By 10:12 a.m., the desperation had crystallized. I was halfway through the second cup when the first email landed on my personal account from Derek's ops address. Subject line blank. Jordan, we need your insight on the routing issue.
Urgent.
The wording careful, almost pleading without admitting fault. Inside Nexus, the war room had become a pressure cooker. Legal hissed on a muted line to the board's counsel. Did we ever formalize succession for Hayes' systems? The silence answered. The CIO, who once blew $200,000 on a digital transformation that amounted to adding chatbots to email, finally spoke. It always worked. We didn't need to understand the details. The words hung stupidly in the air because they were true and damning. My systems weren't simple. They were alive, muscle memory responding to market spikes, legacy integrations, and unpatched vulnerabilities I'd nursed for years. Each patch balanced precariously on the last. Remove the architect, and the whole thing folded like a sinkhole. The CEO slammed his fist. Call him. Walk to his house if necessary. Someone reminded him my credentials were deactivated that morning. We don't have his personal contact. Another stunned silence. The empty chair where I once sat stared back at them like a ghost. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, I watched the news ticker. Projected losses climbed past $50 million already. Clients screamed about locked accounts. Regional processors got silence from the gateway. The interim crisis team jury-rigged a skeleton failover. But it breathed only on life support, my forgotten duct tape holding just enough to limp along. I thought about the 2020 crash again. How I'd manually patched a core flaw that should have brought everything down during peak volume. Told them in meeting notes the transaction logic needed full rework. They nodded, ticketed it, then buried it under UX overhauls and sales partnerships. Assumed the fire stayed out because I kept the extinguisher ready. Now the flaw resurfaced, cascading unchecked. A second email arrived, this one from the board chair herself. Grateful for your years of excellence. Instrumental to our success. Cute. Too late. My new reality settled in the quiet of lose. No performative meetings. No forced enthusiasm. Just the low hum of the diner fan and the tick of the wall clock. I opened my laptop, private node spinning up for something fresh. Typed 2 elegant lines of code. Hit enter. Across town. A private diagnostic feed I still access flickered. Load balancers reported marginal stabilization, but barely. I closed it. Didn't need to watch anymore. Another offer pinged my phone from a direct competitor. Equity. Autonomy. Handpicked team. No middle managers. The key clause, final architectural authority, remains solely with consultant. The line they'd never have offered before. The afternoon brought the board's emergency vote. Marcus Lang, grinning in front of investors just yesterday about visionary pivots, was walked out with a polite HR euphemism, departing to explore new opportunities. Translation: fired for presiding over the collapse. An interim leadership triad took over, scrambling to hold clients. One actually emailed personally, "We recognize your silent contributions." I didn't reply. Sitting in lose. Pie finished. I let the quiet wrap around me. The weight I'd carried for 8 years lifted, not with glee, but relief. They thought they could replace continuity with Jira tickets and spreadsheets. They thought ripping out the institutional memory was like pulling a bad tooth. But systems remember who built them. Mine needed me, not in sabotage, but in the daily reflexes no one documented. The custom scheduling logic born from pain. The patches balancing on threads of forgotten history. No one asked. When I shared critical pieces before, they handed them to interns who containerized them badly, causing bigger messes. So I kept them close. Survival again. By late afternoon, public reports painted a grim picture: stranded trades, breached contracts, angry clients threatening lawsuits. PR spun it as temporary disruption from vendor migration. The skeleton crew kept things on life support, unaware they still leaned on my ghost code in dark subnets. I leaned back in the booth. My wife texted, "Heard the news. You okay?" I replied simply, "Better now." The moral weight settled. Not triumph, but a lingering question. How many companies quietly depend on one person holding the fault lines? How many legacy employees are actually the load-bearing walls until they're discarded? The sun dipped lower over the Chicago River. I paid Carla, nodded thanks, walked out into the cooling air. Phone finally silent. No more buzzing ghosts. The building behind me receded in memory, not burned, just released from my grip. Weeks later, I sat in a sleek corner office overlooking the river at my new consulting role. Modest setup, single monitor, clean air. No corporate slogans peeling off walls. No badge. No micromanagers. Just control and a small team of sharp engineers who actually listened. The cursor blinked patiently on a new project. I typed lines carrying more weight than 100 decks and committees ever could. Across town, Nexus stabilized enough to survive, but barely. Still balancing on threads I'd left behind. They never fully recovered the lost institutional knowledge. Clients trickled back warily. The interim leaders begged for attention. I didn't gloat. Didn't check the feeds obsessively. But memory survives. CEOs fail harder than systems sometimes. The question lingers. When a company discards the person who quietly kept everything running, who really collapses first, the infrastructure or the illusion of control? I hit enter on the final command. The new architecture hummed cleanly. Peace settled in my bones. Gravity had done its work. And somewhere in the silence, the story whispered its quiet warning to anyone willing to listen.